نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. It is a great honor, a great privilege to be interrupted by a man as dashing as that. No, just Bismillah. It is a great honor, a great privilege to be in such blessed company, to be with people that have voluntarily given up their Tuesday and entered a space that we share in hope of learning something that will increase us in our proximity to the divine, in hope of learning something that will help us to refine our character. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Ma bu'ithtu illa an utammima makarim al-akhlaq." The Prophet alayhi wasallam said, "I was only sent to perfect noble traits of character." And in the Arabic language, character is khuluq. Khuluq is character. The plural is akhlaq. And it is directly related to khalaq. Khalaq is how you look on the outside. Your appearance is your khalaq. Your khuluq is how you look on the inside. Whenever I think about that, I think about the disproportionate attention we give to our outward appearances, making sure everything is just right, making sure that we remain fit, making sure that our clothes are nice, making sure that our hair, of course for me I mean figuratively, making sure that our beard, just all of this inordinate attention is given to our khalaq. But at the same time, we often neglect to refine the khuluq. And that is the part of you that is lasting. The khalaq, not only is it changing, but it's aging. It naturally becomes, it loses some of its luster. Just for this side of the room, not this side of the room. Right? But for this side of the room, your khalaq, it naturally loses some of its luster. But your khuluq, it can become more beautiful. It can be enhanced with age. It becomes enhanced with experience. It becomes enhanced when we give it attention. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not deny the beauty of his khalaq or his khuluq. When he looked in the mirror, he would say, Allahumma ahsin khuluqi kama ahsanta khalqi. Oh God, beautify my character as you have beautified my form. Right? He had no misgivings about the fact that he was physically attractive. Right? Huwa alladhi yusawwirukum fil arhami kayfa yasha. It is God who shaped you in the wombs of your mothers, however he wanted to shape you. So you should appreciate how you look, but don't stop at that. That is the very definition of superficiality. If you stop at how you look, what about what you are? Don't stop at your khalaq. What about your khuluq? So if you are very attractive but a selfish person, this needs to be addressed. If you are very attractive but an insecure person, this needs to be addressed. If you are attractive but you use abusive language, this needs to be addressed. Because these are aspects of your khuluq. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Inna Allah la yanzuru. Allah does not look ila surikum, at your outward forms. Wala ila alwanikum. Interesting turn of phrase by God's messenger. And not at your complexions. Subhanallah. When I heard that, I thought, man, that's tough. I had it drilled into me from the time that I was a baby. The blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. Black is beautiful, and black is beautiful. But when the Prophet ﷺ tells you, God is not even looking at that. إِنَّمَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ قُلُوبِكُمْ وَإِلَىٰ أَعْمَالِكُمْ. God looks at your hearts and at your deeds. This is what God sees when he looks at you. You know, I used to have hair once upon a time. You know, I wasn't always bald. And I was one of those brothers that took great pride in my waves. I had wavy hair, you know, 360s, dope boy waves. You know what I mean? And I used to brush my hair incessantly. It's probably why I lost it. It was the vanity. Incessantly. I remember one day I was in the masjid brushing my hair, and an older brother said to me, "Man, why are you brushing your hair all over the masjid?" I said, you know what they say, man, curls for the girls, waves for the babe. So I make sure he said, I see that? All of this attention you're paying to your appearance, and these sisters aren't even paying attention to you. You could be here in the masjid working on your character, and Allah sees it. I looked at my brush. I said, you got a good point. Right? But his point was, all of the attention paid to that which people aren't even paying attention to. And the thing that God sees, if I'm selfish, if I use abusive language, if I'm filled with hate, envy, rancor, jealousy, you know, we actually have a culture that makes light of these vices. That isn't our tradition. We find those things in the heart and we remove them from the heart. So the reading for today, Ibn Ata'illah, he begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Indeed, there is not a single believer until the day of judgment who does not owe the companions, radiyallahu anhum jami'an, an immeasurable debt of gratitude, and who has not been aided by them in unforgettable ways. You know, the Prophet ﷺ is distinguished by many things. Many things. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, in one prophetic report, the Prophet Muhammad said, I have been given 4 things that no prophet before me was given. He said, 1, every prophet before me was sent to their people specifically. I was sent to all of humanity. He said, 2, any place on earth can be made a place of prayer for me and the members of my community. In the previous communities of Revelation, they had to have one consecrated place that they worshiped. He said, 3, the ghanima, the spoils of war have been made permissible for me. They were not made permissible for any prophet before me. And he said, 4, my nation is able to triumph over their enemies without violence. That their enemies have, my enemies have ru'b, which is like fear. They're intimidated by them, so that they're able to triumph over them without violence. But Imam al-Qarafi, he said, if you really want to know what distinguishes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, وَلَوْلَا لِمُحَمَّدٍ مُعَجِزَةٌ لِإِثْبَاتِ نُبُوَّتِهِ إِلَّا أَصْحَابُ لَكَفَاء. If the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had no other miracle that established the truth of his prophethood other than the men and women that followed him, they would be enough. His ashab, radiyallahu anhum wa sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Looking at these men and women, how their lives were transformed by their association with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and thinking even about the fact that we call them ashab, companions, that's unique. The followers of Jesus are called hawariyun, disciples, right? Hawariyun also refers to their preference for white clothing, right? Hawariyun, it means disciple and one of bleached clothing. The followers of Moses are called Bani Israel, the children of Israel. The followers of Ibrahim are referred to as Atba', followers. Only the followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, mashallah. You think if you hunch your shoulders in, that makes it different. Right? Last time you had your shoulders out, this time you got them in. No, you good, man. You all right, you all right. Only the followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam are referred to as ashab. Ashab, it means companion, but it means friend. It actually, it indicates a relationship of equality and parity. That when they thought about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was primus inter pares. That's like the only Latin phrase I know. A first among equals. He did not have, even in his gathering, you know how we go to the masjid, there's a parking spot that says reserved for imam. And I understand. I'm not saying anything is wrong with that. The imam is trying to get into the masjid, he has to give the khutbah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions noted about him, he didn't even have a designated place in the gathering. He showed up to the gathering, he sat where there was space available. This is how he was. Right? They said he would eat what we ate. He drank what we drank. Then they said, وَكَانَ يَتَعَجَّبْ مِمَّا كُنَّا نَتَعَجَّبْ. He would be amazed by the things that amazed us. We would talk with him. We would laugh with him. We would joke with him. This is a different model of leadership. This is companionship. You know, one of my teachers, he said, the ummah is faced with many crises, but one crisis that we scarcely talk about is a crisis of loneliness and a lack of friendship. That we're lonely. And it is important that you have friends, not simply brothers and sisters. See, when I say so-and-so is my brother, so-and-so is my sister, I mean what? I have a duty toward them. That don't mean I like them. That's one of the brothers. You know, I got like a sacred responsibility to them. That's one of the sisters. I got a sacred responsibility to her. But it's very important to have Muslims that you like. Because if you don't know any Muslims that you like, you don't know an Islam that you like. People that you can be your entire self in front of them and you feel comfortable. This is how they were with the Prophet ﷺ. You know, once Abu Hurairah, he went to sleep and he had what I think is properly referred to as a nocturnal emission. I learned that in health class when I was in 10th grade. There's a more vulgar term for it, but you know, we're in the presence of honorable company. We won't use it. You'll just have to intuit what I mean by nocturnal emission if you don't know. And he was walking on his way to, you know, make ghusl. And the Prophet ﷺ saw him. And he felt like for some reason, he felt like shame that he wasn't in a state of ritual purity. So he started hiding from the Prophet ﷺ. Like the Prophet was looking and he would like hide and he would kind of duck. And this is your messenger. The Prophet did not expose him. Hey man, what you hiding from? He just said, I wonder why he's hiding. Later on that day, he said, Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu, you've never seen me without greeting me. I saw you earlier and it seemed like you were hiding. Abu Hurairah said, Ya Rasulullah, I wasn't in a state of ritual purity and I was ashamed to appear in front of you that way. And he said, Abu Hurairah, don't you know that the mu'min is always pure? Right? This was the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Don't you know that? Yeah, making of that ghusl makes it valid for you to pray, to enter the haram, makes it valid, those things. But as far as how I see you as my companion, the mu'min is always pure. There was once, the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with some of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, the men. And a woman that some people identify as Fatima bint Qais, radiallahu anha, she came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, what about women? She asked the question boldly, intrepidly, pointedly, just like that. What about women? That's how she started. What about women? The men are with you, they study with you, they travel with you, they even hear about the rewards that they're going to get in the Quran. What about women? In one riwayah, the Prophet stepped back, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he asked Sayyidina Umar, what do you think about this? Now Sayyidina Umar, he was not accustomed to women, because she was an Ansari woman. She was a woman from Medina. She was one of the Medinese women. He was not accustomed to a woman asking a leader a question like that in front of everybody, boldly, unapologetically. Sayyidina Umar said, Wallahi, I've never seen a woman do this before. I've never seen that before. The Prophet turned to him and said, blessed are the women of the Ansar, because they did not let performative shyness, ihtisham, excessive shyness, prevent them from learning their religion. That they were bold enough to confront me. Hey, what's up? We need some time. We need some FaceTime with you. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet not only granted her request, but he said, go to the women of the Sahaba and tell them that every Monday night we will have a session where I just sit with you all, answer any questions that you have for me. This was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. During one of these gatherings, Sayyidina Umar, not realizing that the protocol was, this is a gathering for sisters, he just walked up on the gathering, just like approached the Prophet, and the women just took off running. And he said, Ya a'da'i anfusikunna, oh, you enemies unto yourselves. You're afraid of me, but you can sit in the majesty that is the presence of the messenger of God. You're afraid of me? They said, Ya Umar, but the Prophet is gentle, he's ra'uf, and he's easygoing. You, on the other hand, we find you absolutely frightening. You have to understand, Sayyidina Umar, there's a book by a scholar named Ijluni called Al-Isaba fi Tamyiz al-Sahaba. And it gives you all of these physical descriptions of the Sahaba. And the amazing thing about this is, as you're reading these descriptors, you realize we name our children after some of these people, but we wouldn't know what they looked like if they walked right through the door. If Sayyidina Abu Bakr came right through the door, a lot of us, if I said, what did Abu Bakr look like? How tall was he? Name one distinct physical characteristic about him. Most people couldn't even say. I said, what's your son's name? Abu Bakr. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. So Ijluni, he compiled all of these physical descriptions of the companions. And he said, Sayyidina Umar kana min ashab as-sudus. Sayyidina Umar was 6 cubits tall. A cubit is like the length from a person's shoulder to the tip of their fingers. So this would make him like 6'8", 6'9". Umar ibn al-Khattab. They say, kana asla', kana aqra'. He was bald. It's intimidating, man, I'm telling you. It's telling you. People are intimidated by it all the time. You know, akhi, you know. وَكَانَ عِنْدَهُ شَارِبْ كَانَ يُفَطِّلُ. He had a mustache, and when he would idle, he would twist his mustache like that. Look, I'm getting scared just reading about it. Like, man, he sounds like a scary dude, man. 6'9", mustache, twisting it, bald. They said that his presence was so bold and imperious that when he approached the gathering, you thought he was mounted on a horse. Right? Just they said, if Omar walked to a gathering, you thought he was mounted on a horse. That's the kind of presence he had. Right? And they said he had a piercing stare. So the women, they were afraid of him. And when they said this, Sayyidina Omar looked at the Prophet, alayhi wassalam, and the Prophet was laughing. Right? Omar istaghraba, he was surprised. And he said, Omar, it's true. You are like that. You know, kind of like you are kind of like a very, your presence is quite compelling. He said, yeah, Omar, but don't worry about it. You don't go one way except that Shaitan elects to take another path. In other words, he was validating Omar. There are some ways that you and I are different, but don't worry, you are okay just the way Allah intended you to be. Right? There are some ways that we are innately, inherently not the same. That's a friend. Not somebody who wants you to be like them, wants you to conform to their standard in everything. But the Prophet ﷺ is the prism through which all of us are trying to be the best versions of ourselves. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what the Sahaba gained from him. Radiyallahu anhum jami'an. Here, he's saying all of us owe a debt of gratitude to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. You know, one thing I think is very important to remember in this connection is that we actually don't understand divine guidance to be an individual enterprise. We say, ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. We say, guide us to the straight path. Sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim. The path of those you have blessed. We want to be members of a righteous community, trans-geographically and trans-historically. See, we don't see ourselves as kind of like, I have my own relationship with God, but I belong to the path of the righteous. I belong to the way of the righteous. If you go to a lot of Western, if you go to a college or university and you study hermeneutics or textual interpretation, the first thing they do is they try to take the text back to like its original meaning, as if when you interpret a text, you're not joining a community of people that have interpreted these texts. This isn't something that you're creating ex nihilo. Well, that's the only other Latin phrase I know. You're not creating this like we're scaling this all the way back to just the elocutionary force of the words. What are you talking about? There's 1,400 years of history of people reading these verses. Now, I'm not saying that you can't offer something unprecedented. Maybe God reveals something about the understanding of a verse that nobody in the past had. But at least respect the fact that I am a member of a trans-historical community of people that have read these verses, lived according to these verses. I belong to a sacred history. I remember watching the Christian public intellectual Cornel West. He was being interviewed. And I get the sense that the interviewer he was also a philosopher, because Cornel West is a philosopher, but the interviewer was atheist. And the interviewer asked him about David Hume's book, Discourses on, I want to say natural theology or something like that. And this book is notorious for debunking people's faith. You know what Cornel West said? He said, yeah, I read that book. And he said, as far as my faith, it pushed me up against the wall. But you know what brought me back? I thought about my grandmother. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about my mother. I thought about my father. I thought about my aunt. I thought about my uncle. He said, if for them, faith and belief in God was a major contributor in them becoming as great as they were as human beings, who am I to say it's not good enough for me? In other words, I am not simply a disembodied intellect, just surveying the intellectual merits of an argument. Part of me yearns to follow the path of people I know were good and decent. It's not just that I'm just, let me see what I think about this. Wait, what did Omar say about it? What did Aisha say about it? What did Zainab say about it? What did Abu Bakr say about it? What did Abu Hurairah say about it? If it's good enough for them, then it's good enough for me. In philosophy, this is something called mimesis. That you follow something simply because you believe in the moral integrity of the other people that adhere to that way, right? For us, that sacred history starts with the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. It starts there. And you'll find that many people, I think, that find religion very, very difficult. Their difficulty with religion is usually a subset of their difficulty with the past, right? Many people, the past is just something outmoded, something passé, something we've outgrown. That's the past. I'm thinking, no, I don't think about my grandmother like that. She's not something I've outgrown. She's something I'm aspiring to. You know, Reinhold Niebuhr, I'm quoting a lot of Christian theologians today, man. MashaAllah. I'm broad in my reading, inshallah. He said, modern man, and by extension woman, is so impressed with his or her technology, not realizing that this is an improved means to an unimproved end. The human condition hasn't changed. The human condition hasn't changed. The struggle of being a good person is a perennial struggle. It's been going on since the first human beings. It will continue to the last. The only thing that changes is the means. Those are technological, those are political, those are economic, but that moral challenge, it remains. When you focus on a sacred history, you're saying, I believe that some people in the past got it right. Doesn't mean that they were perfect, but I believe that their lives were oriented in the right way. And I want to try and orient my life in the right way, like they oriented their lives in the right way. You see what I'm saying? A lot of people that struggle with that, they think everybody in the past was misogynistic. They were racist. They were classist. We're not saying that those biases, those vices didn't exist. But a path of righteousness has always existed. A path of conscientiousness has always existed. We understand the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum jami'an to be representative of that path. And we owe them a debt of gratitude. Because if you think about it, they were as real as you are. Not all of them were perfect. Some of them had problems. You know, one of my favorite hadith about the Prophet ﷺ is the hadith of Nu'ayman, just a lover of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, but alcoholic. He would drink, he would be punished for his drinking. And on the last occasion, somebody said, La'natullahi alayka ya Nu'ayman. God's curse be upon you, Nu'ayman. The Prophet rushed to the person and said, don't ever talk about him that way. I don't know anything about him except that he loves God and he loves his messenger. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He has a problem. Some of the Sahaba had problems. But their lives were oriented in the right way. You know, I tell my children all the time, Dad will not promise you perfection. You know, if you think that you're going to sit on someone's couch 15 years from now and say, man, my father wasn't even perfect, man. Let's just do it now. Your father is not even perfect. But I want to model for you the sincerity of my intent and that I'm not afraid to apologize when I make a mistake. This is what the Sahaba were. The sincerity of their intent. And when they were wrong, they made tawbah. They repented. And we owe them because they showed us how to worship God as flawed, fallible, regular human beings with deficiencies and weaknesses, so that we never confuse humanity for being angelic. We're not angelic. We're not supposed to be angelic. You know, one scholar, he said, perfection is the most inhumane thing you can commit to. Let imperfection flow through you and let it guide you back to God. Perfection is the most inhumane thing you can commit to. Get accustomed to apologizing. Get accustomed to making tawbah. Get accustomed to atoning for your mistakes. Get accustomed to seeking forgiveness. Then you're on a prophetic path. You see? We owe it to the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum jami'an, for modeling that for us. How do I worship God as just a regular human being? Man, I make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes my tongue gets the better of me. Sometimes I do things that I regret. Sometimes I experience ups in faith, downs, triumphs, travails. How do I worship God through all of that? This is what we have the Sahaba for. This is how you do it. And we owe them. He continues, for they are the ones who transmitted to us from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wisdom and rules of life, and they clarified the permissible and the impermissible, and explained of this what was general and what was specific in scope. You know, when it comes to the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, it is their early setting of the boundaries in terms of, yes, our religion has always been representative of a conversation about the will of God. We don't have, at least especially for Sunnis, we don't have any centralized, we don't have a pope-like figure that can offer the, unchallengeable endorsement of God to a position. Our tradition is one of conversation. People have disagreed, and we've learned to accommodate difference of opinion. But the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, they set the boundaries of the conversation, the boundaries of what we can talk about, right? مَا هُوَ مَعْلُومٌ مِنَ الدِّينِ بِالدُّرُورَةِ. Those things that are known by necessity to be from our religion. We get those things from their example, the precedent that they set. So that if somebody says something just off the wall, we actually have a sacred tradition, a sacred history that we can say, no, that's banished from the purview of consideration. That's not even something we should consider. Nobody in our religion ever said that, right? All of that we derive from that generation of Muslims. Right? He said they conquered whole regions and countries and subdued the people of shirk and inada, or obstinacy. Indeed, the Prophet's statement accurately portrays them. My companions are like stars. Through whichever of them you seek guidance, you will be guided. Now, many modern hadith commentators say that this is a forgery. This is mawdu'. This is not an actual hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But in this case, trying to create a community or create an ethic that respects that history, it is good for us to have deference, especially if we study the history, because we know there was internal conflict, there was civil war, there was strife. But in our opinion of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, to have deference toward them, all of them, doesn't mean that their answers were always the right answers, but their lives were oriented in the right way. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. We're opening the floor now for questions, comments, rebuttals, challenges, additions, anything that anybody wants to index into the conversation, inshallah. And it could be about what we discussed tonight or about anything else. My general rule is that as long as I reserve the right to say I don't know,